Welcome to our training. In these modules, we will describe core research concepts so you can learn more about research. We hope this will prepare you to engage in research as part of a research team, as a participant in a study, or even when reading and discussing research. These modules will focus on research that explore ways to support autistic toddlers in the early intervention system and their families. But the concepts we describe apply to research for people of all ages. Zora Neale Hurston wrote in her autobiography, "Research is formalized curiosity." In other words, research is a way of answering questions about the world in an organized way. Instead of only being curious and wondering about the answer to a question, we can use research to find out the answer. We can use research to answer questions about the best ways to support autistic people and their families. In this first module, we will give a brief overview of autism research. We will describe the details of the research process in the next modules. Specifically, we'll discuss what research is, why it's important, and gaps in the history of autism research that have impacted autistic people and their families. You can check out the additional resources for more information about the topics covered in the modules. We will start this module by describing what research is, what a research study is, and how research helps us understand the world in a more fair way. Research is an organized way of answering our questions about the world. Research uses standard procedures to help us answer questions fairly. We all have beliefs based on our knowledge, identity, values, upbringing, and experiences. These beliefs can influence the way we answer questions and think about the world. Personal bias is a term that describes how a person's individual beliefs and experiences influence their opinions about a topic. We can't rely on personal bias because every person is unique, and what works for one child or family may not work for another. The procedures or rules of research help us move past personal bias and answer questions in a more fair and objective way. These rules also help researchers check some of their personal bias. We will talk more about researchers' biases and specific rules that help overcome this bias later in this module and in the next module. A research study is a project where we use research procedures to test a possible answer to our question. Research studies are designed so we can answer our questions as fairly as possible. We will talk about different ways to design a research study in modules 4 and 5. In the next couple of slides, we'll review an example that shows how research can reduce bias when answering questions. Many caregivers of autistic children are concerned about their child's communication skills. Augmentative and alternative communication devices, or AAC devices, are used to help people communicate when they don't use speech. This might be something like an iPad where the child touches a picture in an app, or the iPad says the word for that picture aloud. So caregivers may wonder, does AAC help autistic toddlers learn to communicate? If caregivers ask someone this question, the answer they get depends on the beliefs of the person they ask. That person's bias affects the answer they get. Some autistic people say that using AAC helps them communicate. They might tell the caregiver, "AAC helps me communicate, so you should definitely try it." But others believe that using AAC prevents a child from learning to communicate. They might tell the caregiver, "We tried AAC with my son and it took him a long time to talk. I don't think it's helpful." Both answers are biased by their personal experiences. For example, the caregiver can never know if their child would have talked sooner without the AAC device. When research is done well, it can help us move past these personal biases to get to a more fair answer. A research study might compare the communication skills of children that use AAC to children who don't use AAC to see which may be more helpful. This way, personal beliefs about the best methods won't influence the answer. We can collect information about communication skills for children who use AAC and children who do not use AAC and explore the helpfulness of both possibilities. In fact, one study compared language skills for children in a therapy program with AAC and children in the same therapy program but without AAC. They found that children in the AAC group communicated more than those without AAC after the therapy program was completed. So, if a parent asks, does an AAC device help autistic toddlers learn to communicate, we can be more confident that we are giving an unbiased answer when we say yes. Current research indicates that AAC may help your child's communication skills. Section 2. Why is research important? In this section, we'll describe what research can tell us, what research cannot tell us, and why research is important. Research tells us which therapies are likely to be effective. Effective is a research term that means helpful. Some special research procedures may also tell us the kind of people the therapy may help, why it helps, and how to best use the therapy. But research does not give us absolute proof that a therapy will help a specific child. Research tells us which therapies are likely to help, but we can never know with 100% certainty whether a therapy will work for everyone. Every child is unique, and we can't always account for all that uniqueness in a research study. Most studies tell us if a therapy was helpful on average or for most people. For example, let's say a research study looked at the effect of a new therapy on children's motor skills and included 60 children. The study can tell us if, as a group, those 60 children improved. But it's possible that a handful of the children did not improve. Research cannot always tell us about an individual child's progress. This is one reason why we say that research cannot give us proof that a therapy will help a specific child. Correlation does not mean causation is a common phrase used to describe one of the biggest limitations of research. On this slide, we'll provide some key terms needed to understand this phrase, but we will use examples on the next few slides to better explain what these terms mean. A variable is a thing that can impact other things. It's a category or factor researchers want to measure in a study. Variables about people could be their age, gender, education, and disability status. Variables about the world could be the time of year or location. Variables that are related to therapy could be the time spent in therapy, people's happiness with the therapy, and skill levels before or after a therapy. Correlation means that there is a relationship between two variables. Causation means that one variable causes another variable to happen. In autism therapy research, researchers look at the relationship between a therapy and the skill they are trying to improve. But there can be a relationship or correlation between two variables, even if one variable doesn't cause the other to happen. We'll look at a couple of examples of this in the next few slides. For example, a researcher might wonder about the relationship between two variables, someone's happiness and the time they spend sitting on the couch. The researchers might find that the longer someone reports sitting on the couch, the happier they report feeling. So there is a correlation between these two variables. As one variable increases, so does the other. But sitting on the couch might not be why people are happy. there could be a third variable causing happiness. Maybe people sit on the couch when they're doing their favorite hobbies. It might be that sitting on the couch doesn't cause happiness, but this third variable of time spent doing hobbies does. So if someone is feeling sad and wants to feel happier, we shouldn't tell them to sit on the couch. We should help them find hobbies they enjoy. This example showed that finding causation can help people make decisions about how to support themselves and others. But humans are complicated, and there are lots of variables that can cause something to happen. In this example, there are many variables that cause people to be happy. Correlations are still helpful because they give hints about possible causes. So in the study, researchers want to try to measure all the variables that could be causes. We will apply this concept to autism research in the next couple of slides. For example, a researcher might want to know if a therapy program will help autistic children with motor skills, like running or writing. So they do a research study where they measure children's skills before and after the program. Variable 1 might be participating in the motor skills therapy. Variable 2 would be the child's motor skills. Maybe they find that children did better on a motor skills test after the therapy program. In other words, when children participated in the motor skills therapy, variable 1, their motor skills were higher. Variable 2. They found a correlation between the therapy and motor skills. But maybe children got to play with special equipment in the waiting room of the clinic of the therapy program. This could have given them extra time to practice their motor skills. It's possible that children improved because of this equipment, not because of the other parts of the therapy program. The special equipment was the cause of the child's progress, not the therapy program. A well-designed study will use special procedures to control outside factors like the special equipment and measure other variables that could be causes. For example, if researchers think that the special equipment could be a cause, they might remove the equipment from the clinic during the study. Controlling outside variables makes researchers more confident that the therapy is causing child progress. But it's impossible to control everything. So we can never know the causes of change for sure. We'll talk about these special procedures in modules 4 and 5. Research cannot tell us if something will definitely work for a specific child or if the therapy was the only cause for change, but it is still important for many reasons. In this section, we'll discuss 5 reasons why research is important. Research tells us if a therapy may be effective. It helps us understand which therapies or supports to use without relying on personal biases. Empirical evidence is a term to describe the support for a therapy that comes from research studies. If a therapy has a lot of empirical evidence, it is thought to be effective. Many people have been excluded from autism research, so there might be some therapies that look effective, but because of this exclusion, the therapies may not be ethical or work for everyone. Additionally, a lot of autism research has been focused on skills that autistic people and caregivers think are not important. So it's possible that a therapy is effective, but not for improving skills that people care about. We will talk about limitations based on exclusion and bias later in this module and in Module 2. Research can also tell us if a therapy is not likely to be effective. If multiple studies show that a therapy does not lead to positive results, it may mean that we shouldn't use that therapy in the future. Anecdotal evidence is a term to describe support for a therapy that comes from personal observations. Someone may think a therapy is helpful based on their experiences, but it's possible that another factor caused the positive change they observed. It is also possible that some people think a therapy will not be effective based on their personal experiences, as we saw in our example of personal bias with AAC earlier. Many therapies have a lot of anecdotal evidence from families and clinicians. But in a research study, we may discover that other factors cause the child to change, not the therapy. Research can control these other factors and give us more trustworthy information. This is an example of why we can't trust personal bias or anecdotal evidence. Some therapies are considered ineffective because they hadn't been researched. We're not sure if they'll be helpful. More research should be done on these uncertain therapies to understand if they are safe and effective. Research is used to guide public policies and access to services. If a therapy has empirical evidence, policymakers may cover the cost of that therapy. This will lead to greater access to that therapy. For example, if studies show that AAC devices help children communicate, healthcare providers may want to cover the cost of these devices. This will give more families access to AAC devices. On the other hand, if a therapy is found to be not effective or have negative side effects, there may be policies in place to not fund that therapy or support. Research is also used to help clinicians and families make decisions about ways to support their child. If a therapy is shown to be effective in research studies, families may want to try it with their child. For example, families can use research to decide if they want to try an AAC device with their child. This can be more reliable than relying on anecdotal evidence with personal bias, as we discussed earlier. Research impacts what people know about autism. People often discuss autism research on the news and social media. This then influences what people learn about autism and how it is understood in the culture. This can have good and bad effects on the ways that autistic people and their families are treated and understood. We will discuss some of these effects in the next section of the module. If you would like to take a break while watching the modules, this is a great place to do so. Section 3. Historical Gaps in Perspectives in Autism Research. Many people don't trust autism research because of its biased history. But there are ways to correct these mistakes to align research with the needs of autistic people and autism communities. We will give a few short details about the history of autism research, but this is a complex and important topic. More information can be found in the additional resources for this module. In this section, we'll discuss 3 topics: models of disability, neurodiversity, and the history of exclusion in autism research. A model of disability is a way of thinking about disabilities like autism. There are 2 main models of disability, the medical model and the social model. Most autism research in the past followed a medical model of disability, but now many people want to use a social model. They believe a social model will better support disabled people, including autistic people. We will define these terms and discuss why people prefer a social model in the next few slides. The medical model sees disability as a problem caused by a disabled person's characteristics or impairments. According to the medical model, autism is a disordered way of being. Autism research has historically followed a medical model of disability. This means that autism researchers were biased to view autism as a disorder or deficit. The medical model does not only apply to medical settings like hospitals or doctors' offices. It refers to a way of thinking about disability that is rooted in medicine. The social model says that disability occurs when the social environment does not accommodate a person's differences. For example, if a building only has stairs, this creates a barrier for wheelchair users to enter the building. This lack of accommodation creates disability. Accommodations don't make the disability characteristics go away, but they make it so that characteristics are not a challenge anymore. Many community members prefer the social model of disability. Most autism research is rooted in the medical model of disability because this was the mindset that most researchers, doctors, and clinicians had in the early and mid 20th century when some of the first formal accounts of autism were written. The social model of disability was introduced in the United States during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1970s, but autism researchers have been very slow to adopt this model. Many advocates believe the social model is essential for appropriately supporting autistic people. In the next few slides, we will describe how these models of disability apply to autism and the pros and cons of the medical and social models for supporting autistic people. The medical model sees autism as a disorder. Autistic children may have challenges because of their deficits. Under this model, we should support autistic children by making them act less autistic or fixing them. The social model sees autism as a difference in development. Autistic children face challenges because their differences don't fit with the environment. Under this model, we can support autistic children by changing their environment to meet their needs. For example, autistic people may stim to regulate their sensory and emotional needs. A well-known example of this is a child flapping their arms when they're excited or frustrated. Under the medical model, flapping is seen as a problem because it's not something that non-autistic people do. So therapies will try to stop a child from flapping. Under the social model, flapping helps the children regulate their needs. So we can try to increase social understanding of the value of flapping to reduce social stigma. That way, the child can flap their arms without any consequences. Also, if flapping occurs because the child is upset, we can change the child's environment to prevent them from being frustrated. We will start by talking more about the medical model. There are many negative effects of the medical model. Most researchers used the medical model and believed that all autism traits needed to be fixed. They assumed that autism is challenging without asking autistic people about what they need support with. Some research has even been in line of eugenics with the goal of preventing autistic people from being born or preventing people from ever acting autistic. But autism is not bad or tragic. It is a developmental disability that has its strengths and challenges. The idea that all autism traits need to be fixed ignores what we know about the unique ways that autistic children develop, and it ignores unique autistic strengths. It views this uniqueness as problems that need to be fixed. The medical model downplays the ways that the environment causes challenges for autistic people. People who follow the medical model often believe that autistic people should change to fit the environment. People using the medical model may still make environmental changes, but the long-term goal is to make autistic people act less autistic. This is the opposite of the social model, where changes to the environment allow autistic people to act in a way that reflects their preferences and needs. This idea has led to a lot of stigma around autism in society. Stigma is a word that means disapproval or negative beliefs. People may treat autistic people and their families poorly because they've been taught that autism is bad. Society may also fail to accommodate autistic people because they don't think autistic people's needs are worth accommodating. Autistic people may have internalized stigma by feeling like they cannot be their true selves. They may feel bad about themselves and act in a way that seems less autistic. This pressure can hurt autistic people's mental health. Families of autistic people may also experience stigma. They may be taught that autism is a problem and it's their fault that their child has this problem. For example, early research claimed that autism was caused by cold and uncaring mothers. Even though we now know this isn't true, it has made many people believe that a child being autistic is their parents' fault. Families may feel stigma about their choices for their child because of old research about the causes of autism. For example, a debunked theory that vaccines cause autism may make some caregivers question their decisions for their child's health. Caregivers may feel pressure to make their child act in a way that society thinks is normal and discourage their child from acting autistic. On the other hand, if used correctly, there can be some positive effects of the medical model. It can be helpful for supporting autistic people with specific things they think are challenging. For example, some people may be frustrated by their safe food options because of their sensory needs. They may want support with their sensory needs so that they can eat more foods. The medical model can also help us support autistic people with co-occurring conditions. Autistic people process sensory information differently than non-autistic people. Sometimes this means they may experience pain differently than doctors may expect. They may find some sensations more painful than non-autistic people would. Understanding and supporting this sensory experience can lead to better medical treatments for autistic people. We will now talk more about the social model. The social model has many positive effects. It prioritizes environmental changes to support autistic people and encourages acceptance and understanding of autistic challenges and strengths. Under this model, we can support autistic people by teaching others about autistic needs. For example, we can teach people to accept communication through AAC instead of speech only. We can also include sensory rooms in public spaces. Changing the environment in these ways helps autistic people function without making them change. This can support autistic people's self-confidence and quality of life. There can be a few negative effects of the social model. There may be some autism traits that autistic people have a hard time with, even in a perfect environment. So the social model doesn't recognize that some characteristics are still challenging to autistic people in an ideal environment. Social change can also be slow. Right now, most people don't understand autistic people's needs. So there may be some situations when autistic people need to hide their autism to be safe or meet their needs. Autistic people may need to be prepared to mask or hide their autism characteristics in these situations. For example, some autistic people report that they face stigma in medical settings, where doctors attribute their symptoms to autism instead of a possible medical problem. They may feel like they need to hide their autism to get proper medical care. The safety and well-being of autistic people needs to be prioritized, and the way this looks for people at different intersections of identity may be different. Neither model is perfect. Therefore, we may want to blend the positive parts of the medical and social models of disability to support autistic people. Ultimately, we must respect and understand uniquely autistic characteristics and differences, consider the role of the environment in creating challenges, and support challenges that remain even in an accommodating environment. This will lead to respectful, affirming support for autistic people. In fact, even the World Health Organization uses the social model in its definition of disability. They say disability results from the interaction between individuals with a health condition with personal and environmental factors including negative attitudes, inaccessible transportation in public buildings, and limited social support Neurodiversity means that humans think and experience the world in different ways. Autism is part of this natural variation. It is not a disorder compared to normal thinking. Autistic people have unique experiences and skills that are valuable. No two brains are alike, and no type of brain is better than another. Neurotype is a word used to describe a type or category of brain. For example, people who are autistic share the same neurotype, and people who have ADHD share the same neurotype. Someone who has co-occurring disabilities like autism and ADHD may even have their own unique neurotype. This goes to show how every person is unique and how they experience the world. Researchers can use neurodiversity in their research studies by taking the perspective that being autistic isn't a bad thing. Research in this approach will answer questions that help us understand unique autistic skills and development, and support autistic people in a way that reflects this uniqueness. This approach has not been used very often, but it is growing in popularity. We provided additional resources about this important topic at the end of the module. Historically, regardless of the model used, autism research has primarily included white, monolingual, and English-speaking boys. Some groups of people who have been largely excluded from research include Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, and other people of color, girls, women, non-binary, and transgender people, autistic people with co-occurring medical conditions or intellectual disabilities, and autistic people from poor and working class families, or with diverse family structures. This history of exclusion has many negative consequences. This includes increased stigma, decreased knowledge about autism, and underdiagnosis of autism in these excluded communities. This also means that researchers don't know a lot about the best ways to support autistic people and their families from these communities. To fix these problems, researchers must create more inclusive research. They must also consider unique autistic experiences instead of assuming that all autistic people have the same needs and values. Intersectionality is a term that describes how the factors of a person's identity, such as their race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, neurotype, or religion, intersect or overlap. This can create unique experiences, preferences, challenges, and needs. Autism research must consider this intersectionality instead of assuming all autistic people are the same. Some children and families face racism and systemic inequalities that others don't face. For example, Black autistic people and their families may face discrimination from clinicians that white autistic people do not face. Clinicians may require additional training to make sure that they treat people fairly, and more efforts may need to be made to understand the best ways to build trust with historically mistreated families. Developmental priorities also vary for different cultural groups. So, current autism therapies may support developmental skills that are not important to Black, Brown, and Indigenous families that have not been included in autism research. Additionally, autistic girls and autistic boys may have different characteristics based on the ways that boys and girls are treated in society. Research has primarily included boys, and therefore autism diagnostics tools are created based on characteristics of boys. This leads to underdiagnosis in girls. Autistic people with medical conditions and intellectual disabilities may need additional or different supports than autistic people without intellectual disabilities. Excluding people with intellectual disabilities from research means we don't know the best ways to support them. Autism research also often excludes children from poor and working class families. This means that research may result in therapies that are not cost-effective, feasible, or accessible for these families. Autism research has primarily been conducted by non-autistic researchers. This means that autistic people and caregivers have been excluded from guiding research that directly impacts the supports and services available to them in their daily lives. This can make research unhelpful for people making decisions about ways to support themselves or their children. This history of deficit-based, non-inclusive research has led to biased cultural understanding of autism and ineffective systems of support for autistic people. It has also made researchers biased to believe in deficit-based, non-inclusive definition of autism. Moving forward, we must include autistic people, caregivers, and those from historically marginalized communities into the research process. This will help researchers move past their personal bias and overcome systemic biases in autism research. Only then can we have research studies that are important to autistic people and their families. We'll talk more about this in the next module. So far, we've talked about what research is and the perspectives and bias that autism research has had. In the next module, we'll talk about ways to overcome these biases to create more inclusive research. This resource is part of a project funded through a Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, Eugene Washington PCORI Engagement Award. Please review the references here. This concludes Module 1.